Joy and pain as the IEC announces final election results.
It is therefore my singular honor to stand before you and announce the results of these elections, which are determined in terms of Section 64(1)(b) of the Municipal Electoral Act.
And a political elder reflects on the outcomes. Plus, we also bring you the latest news about political parties and candidates' next moves. All that and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. The African National Congress has achieved a majority in 161 municipalities. The DA achieved a majority in 13. Inkatha Freedom Party is going to run 10 municipalities. 66 municipalities are hung where no party achieved a majority. Let's get some reflections now. Tonight's interview of the day is with former DA leader Tony Leon, who joins us from Cape Town. Good evening, Tony. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Vuyo. Nice to see you again.
Your thoughts just on those numbers, and everything around them.
Well, I do think it was a very significant election because the ANC has gone below 50% in the country and has lost control of 5 of the major metros. So I think that's a psychological and obviously a polling threshold. And I think that might suggest that we're in a much more competitive political phase than we have been for the last 26 years, especially if this election on Monday is a sort of dress rehearsal for what's going to happen in 3 years' time in the national general election.
Did you expect
From the opposition point of view, there were some gains and losses, as you indicated, and those will also have to be interrogated and I think will require introspection.
Did you expect it?
Sorry?
Did you expect things to turn out the way they have? Hi, can you hear me, Tony?
I can hear you. Just could you repeat the question?
Yeah, did you expect the outcome we're seeing?
Well, I think that's I didn't expect so few people to go and vote. That was the first outcome I didn't expect. And I think that is a challenge for the country, for our constitutional settlement, and indeed for the path going forward. When only about a third of South Africans pitch up to vote in a country which traditionally has had a very high voting culture, I think that is a challenge in a way, both not just to the political establishment, but to the constitutional order. On the headline outcomes, I think the ANC probably did worse than I thought they would have done. I would have thought they would have, gone back from where they were last time out, but not as drastically as they did. And I certainly think the election outcome in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly in the city of Durban, the Great Durban eThekwini area, was extraordinary, given that this had been really the banker, if you like, in electoral terms for the ANC in so many elections past. In terms of the Democratic Alliance, I think they did very well to maintain their grip on Cape Town. I mean, that is the highest majority any political party received in any metro, although it's less than they got before, but certainly way ahead of any other party in any other metro, which I think is indicative of the voter satisfaction in Cape Town. I think in the rest of the Western Cape, the DA has got some challenges because it's losing ground to a range of smaller and community parties. And in the rest of the country, it's a mixed bag for the DA. I think obviously they did less well than they did in 2016. That was, of course, the high watermark. They did slightly better than they did in the 2019 election. And they've lost ground in most of the metros, except for Cape Town. But on the other hand, you could say there was some breakout success. So they improved their position in places like Kocha and Midvaal, which are outside the Western Cape, which I think is very important to prevent the DA becoming just a Cape party. And there's real breakout success they had after really 21 years of trying. I mean, you have to go back to when I was leader to win the municipality of Ngeni, that's Howick, Hilton and surrounding areas, which they did, with a very exciting young candidate who I think you'll hear a lot more of in the future, as you will from the new mayor of Cape Town. So I do think this election as well has perhaps provided the party with some rejuvenation in its leadership going forward, which is always necessary in terms of renewal.
A couple of things, I mean, from what you've just said. What do you think was responsible for the decline in Cape Town, more specifically?
Oh, well, look, in 2016, I think elections are either a wave election or a change election or a standstill election. 2016 was a wave election. I mean, the DA did remarkably well, not just in Cape Town, where they got 66, but, Nelson Mandela Bay, in Tshwane, Pretoria, and in Joburg, that they were riding the crest of a wave for a range of reasons. And a huge amount of it had to do with voter dissatisfaction around Jacob Zuma. And they were with the EFF, the repository of that. So I think Cape Town was the beneficiary. You could argue that Patricia de Lille standing for re-election had some impact on this percentage. But I have to say, and one of the under-remarked feature of the Monday election is actually how poorly the Good Party did in the Cape Town Metro. I don't think it got 3% of the vote. And it's not quite a new party. I mean, Patricia's been around since I was around in 1994. So she's a known commodity and political quantity, and yet made very, very little electoral impact this time around. But you could argue the 3% there and the percentage the Patriotic Alliance got suggests that there has been a rise, or clearly has been, of what you might call ethno-nationalist parties who eat away at a broad-based party like the DA and obviously the ANC, even bigger, broader-based party. And you've seen that also on the right. So the Freedom Front continues to get some DA votes, particularly in the north, in Pretoria, and in the northwest particularly. So there is some fraying on the edges for the DA, and they're going to have to take a look at how to take what they've got and build on it, not take what they've got and decline. That you never want to do that as a party.
But what wasn't the writing on the wall, given how the Freedom Front Plus was able to do in 2019? Beginning to chip away that the DA support.
Yeah, look, the Freedom Front does that, but they've got, and I don't want to, some very impressive people in the Freedom Front, but they've got a very narrow message. They appeal to interests of one group, Afrikaans South Africans, and that's all they do. The DA is involved in a much more complex project. You can argue how well or badly they do it. It's another matter. And that is not just to be a party or home for Afrikaans-speaking South Africans, but for non-Afrikaans speaking South Africans, for all South Africans, for all the people. Used to be the party slogan, and is certainly the idea of it. And you can't just concentrate on one group. You can't just narrowcast your message. You've got to broadcast it. And of course, that means that you're going to lose some support on the edges. I don't want to. I'm not in the business of having to slag off anyone anymore, happily, because I'm not in active politics. But the truth is the Freedom Front did pretty okay in this election, but in the city of
they almost tripled their support. They almost tripled their support.
I beg your pardon?
I'm saying the Vryheids Front almost tripled their support in this election.
Oh, absolutely, but it's off a very low base. I led a 1.7% party at one stage. It got 10%, and I could say, well, we'd gone up, 500%, but it's off a low base. And it is, and I don't want to disparage anyone, but it's easier to grow off a very low base than to grow off a much higher base. So when you're at 20% or 40%, adding to that total in succeeding elections is not easy, as these election results actually prove.
At yesterday's media briefing at the National Results Center, John Steenhuisen, answering a question from a journalist, sort of did a 1-2 minute appraisal of his own performance, and he reckons he has done well given what he inherited from Mmusi Maimane. Your thoughts? Has he done well, or as well as he says he has?
Every leader hopes to do well, and I certainly think he's done better than all the gloom buckets were predicting. I mean, there was a lot of anticipation that the DA would fall off a cliff, and they certainly haven't done that in this election. You can argue they should have, could have done better given the national circumstances and the buckets of misery that are raining down on people. But he, I think, has only been the leader or the elected leader of the party for 1 year. So it is early days, and certainly I think the election does give him a platform to build on. But I think, I would just say, and I'm sure he might agree with this, as any responsible leader would, you've got to reserve judgment. You've got to actually say, well, okay, I was elected for a 2 or 3 year period. Now I've got a 5-year plan. Here it is. And you can judge me. Look, the DA, didn't have any kind of catastrophic disasters in this election. It probably consolidated its position. It didn't have any dramatic breakout successes, so it's a sort of standstill situation. But standing still is okay for the moment, but I think everything is going to be determined by what the party does, how it positions itself, what strategies it adopts between now and 2024, because I think that is the goal.
What are the chances of him suffering the same fate that as Mmusi Maimane? Because overall, it is a loss.
Sorry, who's suffering the same fate? It's very interesting. I do apologize. I can't hear.
Okay. What are the chances of John Steenhuisen suffering the same fate as Mmusi Maimane? Given that overall, he has lost.
Yes, well, look, I don't think Mmusi Maimane was suffered any particular fate. He appointed a commission of inquiry into what had gone wrong for the party, and it wasn't just, although that was obviously a huge symptom of it, wasn't just the 2019 elections. There was an enormous amount of disunity and disaffection within the party. There was a policy incoherence in the party. So there were a lot of issues that he actually, as the leader, asked a group of 3 people, I happen to be one of them, that he asked to look into this. And we came to certain conclusions, not based on some thumbs-up judgment, but really based on 220 written representations from a vast number of party formations and 45 face-to-face interviews with the party leadership. And those interviews and those written submissions made some very determined judgments about the leadership capacity, as we politely called it, of the DA. And we made some suggestions. But, Mmusi Maimane himself chose to resign as the party leader. He wasn't instructed to do so. The party, I don't think, I really left the stage, had said, well, here you are, you've got to go. They said, these are the recommendations. The party then, as a party, adopted all the recommendations. And he then chose to leave the party and to leave the leadership in the next day or so. So, it was a process. That was a consequence of a process. Now, I don't know, and it's really not my business because I'm not involved in the day-to-day goings-on the DA, whether there's any such movement or process at the moment. But, the DA is in a position now where it's probably more stable and a bit stronger than it was after the 2019 election. And I think that does give it the chance to go forward. But, it's not for me to say, or even indeed, of course, you must ask the questions. I think the DA, as a sovereign democratic party, must decide its own course.
Are you in any way involved or going to be involved in the coalition talks that the DA is going to be entering into?
I saw, I was just innocently watching an interview on your previous program, and I nearly fell off my chair. I was leading a delegation into these coalition negotiations. It's complete nonsense. and maybe it helps sex up a particular story, but it's untrue in the sense that I certainly was asked by the DA leadership to share some thoughts, after these election results and before they go into any coalition discussions, on the basis of my own experience of coalition leadership. Because in 1999, when I was leading the DP, I led the party into a coalition arrangement with the then NNP in the Western Cape government, which led to the formation of the DA. And then in 2004, I led the party coalition talks with Prince Buthelezzi's IFP, which led to the formation of the Coalition for Change, which co-governed KwaZulu-Natal in the run-up to the 2004 election. And then again in 2006, my last year as party leader, I presided over the party leadership when we had a very complicated coalition arrangement, but after the 2006 local elections, which led to a 7-party coalition being formed in the city of Cape Town under the mayoralty of Helen Zille. So, as you might say, I have some experience, whether it's good or bad or indifferent experience, and I was invited by the party leadership to share some thoughts on those experiences, and what lessons they might hold in a period now where you have so many no overall controlled municipalities, so-called hung councils. Because, my experience, whether it was negotiating with the IFP in KZN, with the NNP in the Western Cape, and with a 7-party coalition in Cape Town some years ago, every situation is different. No political dynamic is static, but certain things don't change. So I was happy to, offer some thoughts on that. And that is, I promise you, to you, Voya, and anyone else, that is the beginning end. I have no wish, I have no desire, I have no mandate to go and lead any coalition talks with anyone. It's not what I'm doing, and I'm quite happy that there are other people who are competent to do that particular task.
Before I let you go, would you mind sharing a bit of what you shared with the DA leadership?
Well, I think, Voya, it's pretty obvious stuff. I mean, obviously there's structural differences. So if you're the biggest political entity and you're negotiating with smaller political entities, that gives you certain advantages, but it requires certain sensitivities. And the reverse of that is also true. And I've been on both sides of that table. I mean, in Carter, in KZN, and when we went to the provincial government, we were much bigger than us at that time. In Cape Town, we were much bigger than the other 6 parties. In the Western Cape, we were bigger than the NNP nationally, but smaller than the NNP in the Western Cape. So, you've got to have regard for the structure and the environment that you're in, and you've got to be realistic about it. And secondly, you've got to have an end point. Now, I mean, apart from the obvious points, and I think John Steenhuisen articulated them in the interview I saw this evening, where he said you've got to have your values and principles, you've got to set out a degree or a commitment to the communities you serve. Absolutely. That, to me, is a non-negotiable. But you've also got to say to yourself, well, is this arrangement, coalition, whatever it is it actually going to serve a political interest in addition to, as it necessarily must, a political interest? And if it makes sense politically and it can serve the community, then do it. If it doesn't, don't do it. And I think the third point really, and this is critical, it might also be obvious, is leadership. I mean, you've got to have people who can lead coalitions. Now, some of us are very good at leading entities and organizations, and others of us are much better and have more, what I think they call in the trade, EQ, emotional intelligence, to actually work with people who are very different from us, who have different needs and different ambitions. And you can't just, say, ek is die boss and ek is in bevel, or, I'm the boss and I'm in charge. You've got to actually realize, well, you might be the number one, but you are only, as they say in Latin, primus inter pares. You're the first among equals, and the other equals, even if they're not equal politically, have also got some skin in the game.
Well, interesting.
So there's quite a lot there, and some work better than others. Some succeed and go the distance, others don't. And I think those are the lessons you've got to apply.
Interesting you say that, because the ANC as acting Secretary General is of the view that the principle of allowing the biggest political party among the parties, giving them the right to lead and form coalitions must be respected as perhaps a starting point. I'm keen to know what your view is on that, especially on the back of what you just said about your relationship with KZN when you had to get into a coalition with the IFP.
Well, Vuyo, with all due respect to the Deputy Secretary General, the first job of a politician and political leader is the ability to count. So if you can't count to 50 plus 1, well, you can stand on your dignity and stand on your office and stand on your plurality and say, well, I'm going to lead this. But if you can't get 50% of the council members to support you, you're whistling in the wind. So I do think successful coalitions and arrangements work when leaders put their egos and their feelings of dignity and status and injured pride in their back pockets and say, well, can we do a deal, a robust deal? Can we do one that's going to serve the community and indeed serve our own party political interests? Because, other than the independent candidates, there are quite a few in some of the smaller towns who are going to have significant say.
Okay, a problem with that line there, but we have to thank Tony Leon, the former leader of the Democratic Alliance, for being so generous with his time. And we're going to take a quick ad break. The Watchdog continues on the other side of this. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. The IEC has declared the poll free and fair. The African National Congress achieving a majority in 161 municipalities. The DA a majority in 13, and the IFP getting a majority in 10 municipalities. 66 municipalities across the country are hung where no party achieved a majority. Here's the IEC's chairperson, Glenn Mashinini.
My singular honor to hereby declare the 2021 municipal elections concluded as free and fair.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says the people have spoken. He was speaking at the National Results Operations Center in Pretoria earlier. He is asking newly elected public representatives to put away their differences and focus on serving the people.
The people have spoken, and we thank South Africans for speaking out through this election. Those in whom the people have placed their trust, the elected councillors, now need to get down to work. Over the past few weeks, we have all spent time with South Africans from all walks of life, meeting them in the streets and being invited into their homes, meeting in the pathways of our villages, in transport modes and vehicles. They told us about their need for houses, of the frustration of electricity cuts, of feeling unsafe because of crime, and also of being despondent after years of not working. At the same time, many have also told us about some of the good work that municipalities, supported by dedicated councillors, are doing in their communities. They've also told us of infrastructure that has been built in the poorest areas and also of essential services that were being delivered. They also gave us advice on how we can do things a lot better. Listening to them, I was reminded how important it is that those in positions of responsibility enjoy the confidence of the people of South Africa. The people of South Africa want their lives improved. They want better services. They want their representatives to be responsive and also to be accountable. They want to live in a better South Africa with equal opportunity, where their rights are realized and where they are treated with dignity and respect. Local government must be a force for good for development and for progress. If we are to make this a new and better era, we as leaders must put aside our differences and work together in a spirit of partnership and common purpose. I'd like to repeat that. I would like to repeat this because the manner in which our people spoke should be indicative of their will and wish to have us as leaders working together. I want to repeat it and say once again, if we are to make this a new and better era, we as leaders must put aside our differences and work together in a spirit of partnership, of cooperation, of collaboration, and common purpose in the interests of the people of South Africa. At the end of the day, my fellow compatriots, we all want the same thing: to better the lives of the South African people. We need to strengthen the trust between citizens and elected representatives through competence, through integrity, performance, and delivery. Public representatives need to be more visible. They also need to be more active in our communities. They need to focus on implementation and make the people of South Africa partners in development and in bettering their lives. Above all, they need to listen to the communities that they serve.
Well, coalition talks are already underway. The DA says it has already identified who they would like to work with. DA leader John Steenhuisen addressed an impromptu briefing a little earlier where he also disclosed that he was part of the talks together with the DA's federal chairperson, Helen Zille.
So we've started already to reach out to potential partners in those, and we obviously hope to solidify those particular talks in the coming days, and hopefully by the end of the weekend we'll be able to start making announcements around where we have been able to form stable coalitions with a focus on the best interests of the people in those particular municipalities, but also in the long-term interest of those municipalities in terms of stability and delivery. We do intend to publish publicly every single coalition agreement that we go into, and we will make it available not only to the media but also to the residents in those particular municipalities who are going to obviously be part of it. We've got a preamble which sets out very clearly the values and principles that will be embodied in there. They focus on service delivery, they focus on accountability and transparency, they focus on fairness, and they focus on ensuring that we have capable municipal administrations, appointed on merit, not on as a result of cadre deployment. And those will certainly be the foundational principles of that particular coalition agreement.
Also addressing a media briefing earlier, EFF leader Julius Malema commended the IEC for its work during this week's local government elections. Malema said that his party was ready to go into a coalition with any political party across the country.
In light of the fact that there were no outright winners in different municipalities, the EFF will engage with all political parties that will approach us to talk about constituent government in different municipalities. The political parties that approach us must know that the first item on the agenda before sharing of positions will be the commitment to the people. Anyone who comes to the EFF must come with a clear agenda of land redistribution, water provision, jobs, sanitation and care of disabled people. We are willing to listen to everyone and will take decision on coalition only when we are satisfied that they will lead to the total upliftment of our people and defeating poverty. The nature and form of how these conditions will be constituted will be discussed with different political parties and will be under the constant guidance of members of the EFF, communities where coalitions will happen, and Central Command team.
Earlier, my colleague Yolisa Njamela caught up with One SA movement leader Musi Maimane, who said South Africans are now ready for change.
We're comfortable and confident that the independents we've put forward have done extraordinarily well. In many councils, we even beat the established parties. And more than anything, the model of Section 15As, as you put them on the ground of direct elections, has worked in these elections. Emphasized by equally the fact that given the low voter turnout, given the fact that those who did turn out rejected the big parties and opted for independence and direct elections, I think we can sit back now and say we've got a great foundation to build on for 2024.
And now, before you and others formed this movement, you were very reluctant after leaving the DA to join formal politics, but we understand that you are keen on going back.
Well, I wanted to set up a movement because the power of the movement as we have it now is that it's attractive to people who are not in politics. The mayoral candidate in Enoch Mkhichima is a businessman who runs a billion rands industry, the same budget as the municipality. He's entered into politics in that sense. So now we've got to think about 2024. So to my personal question, as you know, I've advanced this idea of direct elections, and I'm waiting for the electoral reform bill to come out in 2022. June, and then subsequent to that, you will be assured Musi Maimane will be standing officially in 2024 to build a South Africa that works for everybody. And I think we're confident enough with the infrastructure we've built, with the people we're working with, that I think the journey going forward is going to be one that will bring change. As we've seen, the rejection of the ANC and the DA means South Africans are hungry for change.
In the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, the two big parties, the ANC and the DA, each won 48 seats in the 120-seat council. The EFF increased its seat allocation to 8, while newcomers, the Northern Alliance, clinched 3 seats. There will be 12 political parties represented in the Nelson Mandela Bay Council. The Freedom Front Plus, ACDP, Defenders of the People, and the Patriotic Alliance will each have 2 seats. The Good Party, UDM, AIC, and AIM will each have 1. And we believe conversations have started among some of the parties in Nelson Mandela Bay. We'll see what the outcomes will be, hopefully, in the next few days. We're going to take a quick ad break. The Watchdog continues right after this. Welcome back, and if you've just joined us, we are talking about the final results that the IEC declared a couple of hours ago. The ANC receiving a majority in 161 municipalities, the DA achieving a majority in 13 municipalities, and the IFP is going to run 10 municipalities. We have altogether 66 municipalities that are hung where no party achieved a majority. We continue, of course, with reflections on the back of those numbers. Joining me now is Professor Susan Boyson. Prof, good evening. Thanks once again for your time. Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen, speaking to journalists not too long ago, says they have already started negotiations with potential coalition partners, and he says by the weekend they will be ready to announce the outcomes of those conversations. It would seem that they are moving with speed.
Yes, indeed. I was very interested also to hear the reports of the DA really having developed a template and really seemingly very prepared as to what the different required contingencies are that are necessary to put coalition agreements in place. That seems to be quite professional and well anticipated, I guess, although I doubt whether anybody in South Africa really anticipated the extent to which coalition governments were going to be realized. This current 66, of course, is more than double the previous 23 that we had on the basis of the 2016 elections. And comparing the DA with the other two main political parties, the EFF and the ANC, we heard in that briefing at the Rock Center today that Julius Malema indicated, yes, they will cooperate with people, although he phrased it in slightly different terms than his deputy, Floyd Shivambu, did yesterday. But making it clear, by my understanding of coalition politics, that they would be prepared to go in a type of alliance that the EFF had with the DA in places like Johannesburg, until a few years ago, which we call in coalition speak a confidence and supply agreement. That is one in which there is not a formal coalition, but parties normally on quid pro quo exchange on specific policy concessions for their particular constituencies, cooperate and, for example, help in the election of council officials, for example, a speaker and a mayor, or help to pass the budgets. And it seemed to be that EFF still developing particular position and approach, have that in mind. And we know in the third party here, the ANC, we know that from their own statements that their National Working Committee will be, I believe, finalizing or processing some position tomorrow. Already yesterday in a statement, Jesse Duarte on behalf of the ANC indicated that their requested approach, if I could call it that, would be to go with to ask that the biggest party, in these cases obviously mostly the ANC that they have in mind, would be given the chance to lead the negotiations or deliberations. So the three main parties, obviously all three, will be key players in the coalitions, not the only players, but very key players, and very different approaches we see coming from them.
You know, one wonders, Prof, whether the agility that seems to be that the DA seems to be displaying, you know, is not going to give them perhaps an advantage, a competitive advantage, because, I mean, you know, lots of processes, as you have just said, that the ANC is going to follow, and you have a whole, you know, big NEC that will have to, you know, discuss, and then thereafter they will have to pronounce, and then allow a delegation to then, you know, start negotiations. Whereas John Steenhuisen just, told journalists that it's him, Helen Zille, and Ivan Meyer, and they are moving, and he's already, you know, declared that by the weekend they will tell us the outcomes.
Yes, it certainly creates a very strong impression of professionalism, something which I believe is very necessary in the process of negotiating coalitions, to have it all in place and to know what the requirements are, to be prepared for all the potholes and stumbling blocks that could come in the way of these negotiations. And it has never damaged anybody in these coalition negotiations to be rapidly out of the starting blocks, while other political parties seem to have been caught more off guard. At least the ANC seems to have been caught off guard. The DA seems to, by all appearances, have been planning to put these processes in place. And that can definitely give them an advantage. Also because other political parties may be pleasantly surprised about the professionalism that has gone into. As I said, that is what is required. But then it's not necessarily the case, because there are 2 weeks, as we know from the legal requirements, 2 weeks that are available for these negotiations to take place. And much can happen in 2 weeks. Political parties can also tentatively agree, and then, as we've seen in many cases internationally, that they really suss out all options. And as we even saw in SALGA's guidelines that were published yesterday, that there are specific processes planned out. And one of the recommendations in that SALGA guide is also that if political parties do not find the perfect match or the best possible match or good match with potential coalition partners in the first place, then to regroup and start approaching another. And so the fact that the DA has got these apparent preparations in place doesn't necessarily mean that it has an advantage, but it is potentially an advantage, because it will be approaching and will be probably offering deals to its potential partners. The DA probably also has, in many cases, potential alliance partners lined up. As we know, I think the ACDP has stated that it will work with and Freedom Front. Those ones probably work with the DA, and if the DA just needs a little bit of top up in order to get an outright, that means 50% plus majority, it could be in a very good position to tie up some of these coalitions.
Of the two, Prof, and could this be perhaps the reason, the ANC appears to be a lot more relaxed compared to the to the DA? Could it be that at the back of their minds, the ANC knows that it's got a lot to play around with? Because, I mean, with 161 municipalities where you enjoy the majority, you could strike, different deals. At national government, I mean, yes. They can post people, give them diplomatic postings, for example. They could place people, yes. In pretty much wherever, they may want to, So could that be the reason that perhaps they are not so quick, or as quick as the DA, off the starting blocks?
Yes, it could very well be a big part of the reason, because as you know, there's so many possibilities. There's a party that is still dominant, that controls the bulk of the councils, and still dominant in state power, very fused with state power, and has control over an immense number of public positions, very attractive public positions. Then it is quite possible, and very likely, actually, that good patronage exchanges may be offered, perhaps not directly to the people involved in the negotiations or in particular councils, but there are many advantages and benefits that can be exchanged in this process of negotiations. So the ANC definitely has the upper hand in forthcoming negotiations. It will be very interesting, though, for me to see which of the possible split-offs from the ANC. I believe there is, I've heard this in the last few days, that ANC people there at Rock Floor in Pretoria are talking about the small split of parties or individuals here and there, even a couple of independents, are children, quote unquote, of the ANC, and therefore hoping that these smaller splinter groups, or sometimes that have become wonderful community parties, as we've seen in Maluti-Apofeng, for example, that these people may see their way clear to come and work with the ANC in future. And so it has got that factor, which could be an advantage, unless these former ANC people, of course, were so alienated in the process of establishing their own organizations and running against the ANC, that they feel they have a lot to prove in that process. It all will depend, and we are going to see much evidence for and against in the next 2 weeks as to how much of that alienation there is. And of course, I can also just add here that generally these negotiations, as legally, the legal requirement is that they will be concluded in 2 weeks. That means 2 weeks from today, this evening now, the time of promulgation of the election results. So officially the parties have 2 weeks. But as we also saw in 2016, there were a few cases where there had been attempts to constitute the new council, to elect the officials, but that those were not successful. And as the cases were, those councils were granted small extensions by a few days or a week or two. I can't remember the exact number of days of extension, but as long as they had tried to constitute that new council, it was treated with good sympathy.
Professor Susan Boyson, thank you very much for tonight and the past few days. Professor Susan Boyson, who of course has been our friend over the past few days. And that's how we come to the end of tonight's program. We're going to leave you with those fireworks at that ceremony where the IEC was announcing the final results a couple of hours ago. Good night.